welcome to those of you new to One League. One League is a global education institution connecting the world's most gifted, underserved talent with world-class education and opportunities. And we offer this in collaboration with Harvard, Stanford, and MIT, with the goal to build conscientious leadership and meaningful positive impact in communities and regions all around the world. Welcome One League faculty, welcome One League global mentors, welcome One League fellows, and welcome One League friends to today's very special event with our special guest, James Reinhart. A brief word about the event before we get started. We'll spend the first 45 minutes in a structured discussion with James and reserve the last 15 minutes for questions directly from the audience. Please use the Zoom chat feature to share your comments, thoughts, reflections as we talk, and most importantly, your questions throughout the session. And I will try my best to get to as many top voted questions from the chat as possible. So with that, I'm so thrilled to introduce you all to my friend, my colleague, my HBS, Harvard Business School, that is, learning teammate, someone I admire and respect deeply, James Reinhart. So James, I'll do a quick bio intro for you. James is the co-founder and CEO of ThredUp, the nation's leading marketplace to buy and sell high-quality used apparel. Under James' leadership, ThredUp went public in 2021, and the company was recently recognized as Time 100 Most Influential Companies in 2023. James graduated from Harvard Business School and Harvard Kennedy School. He was a Goldsmith Fellow in Social Enterprise at HBS and a Bill George Fellow at the Center for Public Leadership at the Kennedy School. Prior to Harvard, while working in the Bay Area, James helped develop one of the nation's premier public school, Pacific Collegiate School, annually one of the top-ranked schools in America by US News and World Report. After that, James co-founded Beacon Education Network, a charter management organization serving low-income students on California's Central Coast. James is an avid golfer, cyclist, and wine drinker, but he says not all at the same time. And he lives with his wife, Michelle, and 3 beautiful children in Oakland, California. Now, James and I first met, I would say, on our very first day at Harvard Business School, now over, James, 15 years ago.
Many years, yeah. It's a lot of years. A lot of years, basically. And we were part of a randomly assigned study group, and they called it Learning Team. And we woke up every day, with this group and, coffee in hand, ready to go, some ungodly hour for an entire year. So that was actually quite a highlight for me. We're used to seeing each other right in the morning,
Right in the morning.
Right out of,
exactly. For an entire year. Absolutely. Absolutely. And then, James, I don't know if you remember, but I remember this very clearly. You hosted us, the Learning Team, at your beautiful home, and you shared the ThredUp idea. And I was like, this is beyond brilliant. Even to this day, I actually, 90% of my closet is used clothing already. And we'll talk a lot more about ThredUp, but I'm definitely a huge fan. Followed James' journey for all these years, truly admire, James, what you've built and the real positive impact you've had on an incredibly huge and quite wasteful industry, a $1 trillion industry, apparel industry, and you've really developed a new category of commerce. So I'm thrilled that today we get to hear James' story in his words and be inspired by as many accomplishments as I have over all these years. So James, a very, very warm welcome to you at One League. Thank you so much for being with us. It's
great to be here. Thank you for having me. Excited to see all of you guys.
Great, fantastic. All right, James, so we love to start from the beginning. We'd love to know a little bit about your childhood and your upbringing and what you were as a kid.
So I grew up in a very middle class family in New Jersey. I went to public school. I was always a kid who I never did particularly well in school. In fact, like there's a funny story about me almost not graduating from high school because I didn't pass the required math curriculum, because the math class I had to take was at first period at 8 a.m. in the morning, and I could never get to class on time. So like I was not like a particularly great student. But my childhood was one of, I always found myself in leadership roles, sort of in anything that I did, whether it was, you know, as far back as things like my wife always makes fun of me. Things like, you know, in my elementary school, there was the thing called the safety patrol. And it was like the kids who stood outside and like made sure that when kids crossed the street that they did it safely. And I was like the head of the safety patrol, right? And, you know, in student government in middle school, like I was involved in student government. And so I would say that like my childhood was one of, you know, pretty like standard or substandard academic performance, but I was really committed to getting the most out of life, doing lots of things, you know, exposing myself to stuff, and then just like, you know, in leadership roles, you know, from a very early age. And so I think there's something about my DNA, you know, because I don't think it wasn't as though my parents were, you know, leaders in any organization per se, but there was something in there where I naturally felt like I could be in a leadership role, which is, you know, when I reflect back, is kind of an interesting way to grow up.
Yeah, that's amazing, and from such an early age. What would you say were some of the core values that were important in your household? And perhaps, you know, core values that you were forming, you know, on your own as you were growing up?
Well, I think like, you know, it's sort of, you know, we never, my parents were divorced at a very young age. So my parents got divorced when I was 5. And my dad lived like a very different, we lived in the same town, but he grew up in a home where, you know, he was probably the second or third generation to go to college. Like his side of the family like had a little bit of money, whereas my mom's side, she was the first in her family to go to college. She was the only one of her 4 sisters to go to college. It was a family that did not have any money at all, and so I think what ended up happening in my childhood, like the value system that evolved, was I was constantly living in sort of 2 worlds, right? On the one hand, there was a world where, you know, there was, you know, some sort of generational like growth and class mobility, you know, and another side that there wasn't. And so I think that the way that manifested in me, you know, personally was, I was very capable of navigating in any environment that I was in. And so the value system was very much like treat everybody with the utmost respect. Everybody has something to offer. Be caring, be kind, and then be really giving. And so like my childhood, like you know, especially on my mom's side, nobody had a lot, but they were very generous. I remember like my aunt was basically on food stamps, and she would still give me like a really nice Christmas gift every year. And I was always like, well, I don't need this, but like, and so I think that sort of value system of like generosity, even when you don't have a lot, was something that was really important to me. And then just that idea of really treating like that everybody has something to offer and give. And so I've tried to really carry those values on, you know, in my life.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing that. And I see it. I see that you carry, you know, those values through all these years. So James, what was your very first job?
So my very first job was, so I actually had a lawn mowing business. So, you know, classic, I mowed lawns in my neighborhood. What was interesting about my lawn mowing business is that I only ever mowed like 1 lawn, because, and this is like, I think something about like the entrepreneurial DNA, is I mowed 1 lawn and I was like, man, this is hard and it's hot. There's a lot of work. And I had friends in the neighborhood, right? and I'll tell Anthony Spiro and Tom Eliason, like two guys live down the street, and they're like, I want to mow lawns. And I was like, all right, well, great. You mow the lawns, I'll go get the business. And so my like lawn mowing business at the age of 10 or 11 was I was doing the knocking on doors, I was doing the sale, and I was like lining up Tom Eliason and Anthony Spiro to mow the lawns. And they were using my lawnmower, my gas, right? And so what's funny about that to me, because at the time it was just like, oh, James is clever. But in like retrospect, like there was something, I don't know, right, genetic about like the idea that like, you know, you can like build stuff and leverage other people's like, you know, like work experience, what they want to do, what you're good at. And like, and so so that was my first job, you know, when I was, you know, 10 or 11. And then because I lived with my mom and we never had like a lot of money, like I was highly motivated to like have my own source of income. And like, to me, having some dollars was like a real indicator of freedom, right? I could spend it on whatever I wanted. And so when I was 14, I got a job like bussing tables at a local restaurant. And that was great. And I worked at that place all through, I got it in 8th and 9th grade, all through high school and into college. I worked at that place in kind of rising levels to the point of where I like, by the time I was in college, I was pretty much running that like restaurant in the summer. So those were like my two kind of jobs. And yeah.
Amazing. And first really was a startup more than a job. And so you can an entrepreneur, you know, starting at age 8. Yeah, amazing. All right, so you have a BA in history from Boston College, an MBA from Harvard Business School, as we said, and an MPA from Harvard Kennedy. Can you tell us more about what drove your decisions to pursue each of these lines of education?
Yeah, I mean, you know, going to Boston College, as I said, like I was not a great student, and so, you know, I thought that I deserved to go to a bunch of Ivy League schools, like when I was in high school, and I didn't get into any of them, and like summarily rejected from every Ivy League school that I applied to. And so, but I did get into Boston College, which is a good school. I got into a couple of others, and ultimately I decided to go to BC because my sister went to Boston College Law School. So it's funny how like, for many these days, it's a calculated decision. For me, I was like, I don't know, my sister's there, Boston's cool, let's go there, right? And so, so I went to BC and I studied history, and I had a minor, although I don't think it was ever became an official minor because I, again, didn't do the paperwork, in philosophy. And I have always been fascinated by just like ideas, by like the people, places, and things that sort of change the way the world works. And so I was fascinated by history. I was fascinated by philosophy. I had a very, like many of you have probably experienced over your career, like I had a professor my freshman year in college who was a philosophy professor, because you were required at Boston College to take philosophy and religion as part of the core curriculum. And it was a philosophy professor that really changed my life. I mean, he was very impactful in how I thought about the world. We ended up becoming close. He's the one who married my wife and I, you know, almost 20 years later. He officiated our wedding. So I, you know, I studied history and philosophy because I cared about these ideas, and I was never like, I was interested in just like this intellectual pursuit. You know, my junior year during college, I went abroad to Oxford, and all I did was like read books and sit in cafes and like, you know, pretend to be intellectual. But it was like a really important part of my development. And I think actually, when you look at CEOs across the tech landscape, it's a surprising number of CEOs were philosophy majors. And so I don't know if there's some correlation about like sort of first principles thinking and how entrepreneurs get built, but that was my story at BC.
Yeah, got it. Beautiful. Awesome. And MPA Kennedy, why did you decide to?
Yeah, and so when I graduated from BC, I had a job to work on Wall Street, which I didn't really want to do. So so I turned that down, and I wanted to be a teacher. And so, and there's a long story about why I couldn't get a teaching credential at Boston College, but I will save that for part two. But I couldn't get a teaching credential, but I really wanted to be a teacher. And so I decided to just move cross country and live with my sister and try and get a job teaching. She lived in Seattle, Washington. So my first job out of college was working as a bartender in Seattle, looking for teaching jobs, because I was quite principled that I didn't want to just do like a Wall Street soulless thing. I really wanted to do something that was interesting to me. So I ended up finding a teaching job in California, moved from Seattle to California by way of New Jersey. I kind of flew home, picked up my car, drove across country, and landed in California. And I taught history and English to 8th graders and 10th graders. And that was my first real job a few months after college.
Yeah.
And then, so to finish, so then what I basically, it was in schools. I helped run the school, Pacific Collegiate. I helped start some schools, and then I went and I was interested in education policy. So the intersection of private policy, public policy in education. And so that's when I went and did the joint degree at HBS and the Kennedy School, and that's when we met.
Yeah, got it. And then you founded National Premier Public Schools, and then the Charter Management Organization.
Yeah.
When was that?
So Pacific Collegiate was from like right after Boston College up until HBS. And then Beacon was actually the first year that I was at the Kennedy School. I was flying back and forth, getting that off the ground in California. And now, now that's a sort of a standalone entity here in California.
Amazing, amazing. What was that experience like? And do you take anything from that as, you know, you look at sort of all the years at ThredUp?
I mean, I think I think one thing about this school experience was that there's nothing harder than like a room full of 8th graders. And so running a company is way easier than like managing a room full of like testosterone fueled 8th grade boys, right? And so so in all seriousness, I think that like working in a school, working in those dynamics was really important. And the other thing is you learn how to talk to parents, and you learn how to deliver bad news, and you learn how to like hold empathy for kids who are going through stuff, and like and so all the dynamics that exist in a school life, because these were kids that came from all walks of life. And so so there was a lot of, I think, learning, in there and in the school piece. And then I think starting Beacon Education Network in 2006, charter schools at the time, although this has sort of evolved, over the past, 15 years, they were very, very contentious back then. There was an enormous amount of politics. People didn't want charters in their districts. And so I think in that period of founding the network, there was a lot of like learning around how do you sort of stick to it and persevere in the face of, of like huge political headwinds. And so I think it just builds resilience that you just have to keep going.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, let's talk about ThredUp. If you could tell us a little bit more about the mission of ThredUp, what ThredUp is all about, and how did the idea first come about?
Yeah, so the true founding story is actually when I was in my 3rd year. So this was like 08, 09. If you remember, I didn't have any money. I was a teacher, which means I didn't save any money. And I was going to business school and Kennedy School, which were quite expensive, right? We didn't have one league at the time, right? And so we were paying a lot of tuition. And I went to sell my clothes at the local consignment store. I woke up one day, I was like, hey, this is a bunch of clothing that I don't want to wear. I'm going to go sell them. I'll get some money. It'll be great. And they wouldn't take them. They said, oh, we just do luxury. I was like, yeah, but these are like nice things. They can't be worth 0. And they're like, yeah, that's not our problem. And so that was like the moment where I was like, there's something broken here about this, because this is a cashmere sweater and this is a nice coat, and like, it's got to be worth something. And that, in my mind began the journey of like, okay, well, what's broken about this market that these things that should have residual value to somebody are essentially being valued at 0? And so at the time, I was in a class at school called, I forget it was like, whether it was like strategic technology and changing markets, or it was something like that. But the core premise was there are technology shifts in the world that happen, and how do those technology shifts like impact like the formation and creation of new industries. And so I was like, well, this was like the time when the iPhone had just been invented. So, you know, people forget the iPhone was like 2008, 2009. And so there was like huge change happening in consumer behavior. And at the time, I just thought like, hey, there had to be a better way. And so that's how the business got started. It got started with the idea that we could build a more efficient clothing exchange system. So it started peer-to-peer. It started with men. And so it's funny because it started peer-to-peer, like an exchange, like eBay, right, for example, for men. And right now it looks nothing like that. Now it is fully managed by us, and it's only for women. But you know, you kind of do what you know to get started, and then you take market feedback. And I think at the time it was very much driven around making a market more efficient. And then I think, you know, over the first couple of years, it evolved to be more mission driven, I think. And so now I think about ThredUp today, the company that we have, as a mission driven organization, but it did not start out that way.
Yeah, awesome. Love that story. So from that moment where you took your clothes in, right, for consignment, to when you said, all right, I'm going to build a company, you know, I'm going to spend the next, you know, 10 plus years of my life building this company.
Yeah.
Been more than 10 years. Was there a moment for you where you said, you know, I'm going to commit my life to this?
Well, there were two things. One was I had, you know, before I came up with the idea for ThredUp, I had been an intern. I'd interned at a consulting company. I'd spent a summer at a consulting company. If you remember, this was during the financial crisis, 2008, 2009. So there were lots of layoffs. And so I actually got laid off I had a job offer to start at Parthenon Consulting. And in the summer of 2009, so like June, I got laid off. Now, I had been working on ThredUp at that time for like 7-8 months, and I had spent all the money that they had given me like in advance. So I was super lucky that they laid me off and they let me keep some of the money. So that was like really an important like part, because I was really anxious that I was going to have to tell them, I don't want to come work here, but I can't give you your money back because I don't have it, because I've been spending it like working on this business. So that was like really like a critical like moment. And it just shows like how far out on the risk curve I generally live, right? I mean, it was pretty irresponsible for me to spend a bunch of money, somebody else's money, and just kind of hope it would all work out. but it did. The second is that I met a guy named Brian Spaley, who is the founder of Bonobos, co-founder of Bonobos Pants Company. And then he was the co-founder, CEO of Trunk Club. Very successful guy in retail and fashion, went to Stanford, GSB. And I was talking to Brian about the idea, and I was like, but I don't know if this is really going to work, blah, 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 blah. And he said, look, it may be a terrible idea. Like, it may not work. He's like, but like, you're not going to, your life is not going to be worse if you know, over the long term, if you give it a try. And I was like, yeah, that's what everybody says. He said, but think about it like this. A typical MBA program is 4 semesters, right? He said, give yourself a 5th semester. He's like, just pretend you're like on the slow track. Like, it just took you 5 semesters to get through business school, then 4. And use that 5th semester to validate the ThredUp idea, which was effectively like, I would get about 6 months. He's like, give yourself like 6 months. And then like, if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. And somehow that frame of like the 5th semester was so powerful to me, because it time boxed the experience, and it made it feel like a whole lot less risky. And so those 2 moments, I think like a lot about as really pivotal. And so you know, I spent that 5th semester working on it, and here we are.
Yeah, amazing. That's super, super helpful advice and perspective. So during that 5th semester, James, you raised capital, is that right? Is that also when you started to move the company, or that was much later?
No, so we started the 5th semester was fall of 2009, and the only real like data we got, we had raised a little bit of money from like friends and family, and by that I mean we had raised $70,000 for like a year. So we ran the company for the first year on $70,000. So I just went like further and further into debt. So did Chris Homer, my co-founder, and we just kept trying to like validate like the idea around, and at that point it had become a kids business. So we sort of moved from men's to, we know kids outgrow their clothes, there's a common replacement cycle, there was opportunity in the kids business. So we kind of kept going on that. And we kept trying to raise money, could not raise any money from any like institutional investors. Then we raised like a little bit more money in the spring of 2010, really just sort of begging friends and family. And that was like, you know, just enough to keep us going. And then in the summer of 2010, I was like, okay, well, we either have to like raise money, figure this out, or like it's not going to work. And then we were just relentless. Like I went everywhere, asked everyone, and eventually Patricia Nakash at Trinity Ventures out here in San Francisco was like, yeah, I get it. I love this idea. And she gave us a term sheet for $1 million. And I negotiated up to being $1.2 million. And then that was sort of the first real institutional money. And she now is still involved with ThredUp. She's the chair of my board and has been an incredible supporter, you know, for years.
Wow, wow. And then throughout those years, there's been, as you hinted at, a number of pivotal moments, right? Mm-hmm. And also where you've really shifted and evolved the company. So tell us about some of the most important moments like that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the big pivots are, we went from peer-to-peer, which is, you know, like eBay, you know, you're just connecting a buyer and a seller, to managing all the product. So that was a big deal when we decided that we were going to take all of the inventory ourselves, because our thesis was there's a lot of friction for sellers listing your own items, taking pictures, fulfilling it. But people have been used to giving stuff to Goodwill or giving stuff to friends. Like that has been true for 1,000 years, right? Of just like giving away things you're no longer using. And so we thought we could really crack the seller side by reducing all the friction and just letting people send us their stuff. We wouldn't pay them very much for it, but we would like help them conveniently clean out their closets. So that was like a really, really big, you know, pivot in the business. And then the pivot from, you know, men's to kids to women was a really big pivot, because the women's market is much, much larger than anything else, you know, in secondhand. And so those were the two like fundamental pivots in the business. And then I think what's evolved that we could never have predicted is just, you know, over the past decade, like just consumer behavior, consumer awareness of resale, secondhand, sustainability. You know, I like to think that we were catalysts for that, and, you know, helping educate a whole generation of consumers around like why this matters. But I also think we were the benefit of just tailwinds that were out of our control, which is just sort of a generational, you know, young people kind of coming up and realizing, oh yeah, fashion's quite wasteful. And so I think we benefited a lot from that.
Yeah, certainly, probably a bit of both, but for sure, I think you played a tremendous role, you know, in actually shaping that perspective for the younger generation. So,
and then I would say the other like important like pivot or is this, you know, I think entrepreneurs systematically underappreciate luck in all of this. Like there's a lot of luck involved in being being successful, however that's defined. And so I think we were very lucky at certain moments of ThredUp's existence where, one of our, I became friendly with Reed Hastings, who is the CEO and founder and CEO of Netflix, through my work at the schools. And it just happened to be that Reed was very close with some venture capital investors. And so when I went to pitch those venture capital investors, they were like, Reed Hastings is your friend? Like, if I call him, will he say nice things about you? And I was like, yeah, he will. They're like, really? I'm like, yep. And they called him, and Reed was basically like, I don't know anything about James's business, but I think James is great. And that was good enough for them, right? And so, and then, when we hired our first head of operations, John Voris was working for Elon Musk at SpaceX and just hated working for Elon and wanted to do something else. And I caught him in a moment of I got to get a new job. I hate working for Elon. And so I was able to get John to come work at ThredUp. He went from rockets to used clothes, but ended up being here 10 years. And then another guy named Anthony Marino, who became our chief marketing officer. He was working for Richard Branson at Virgin, helping launch Virgin Hotels. And he wanted to do something that was earlier and more impactful. And I was convinced him to join. And so because he was just in a moment where he was like, what am I doing building hotels? The world does not need more hotels, but the world needs more sustainable choices for consumers. And so I think in my mind, there's all those parts where, yeah, there's some skill in recruiting and hiring, but there also, you catch people at moments in their lives that's really powerful.
Yeah. Though I'm sure, the power of your vision and, you being able to convince them to join you at that moment in time played a big role as well. But yeah, no, absolutely. So
I think my vision actually helped get them to stay.
Yeah.
Right. And so I think that's I think the ability to get somebody who has great opportunity to stay for a decade. Mm-hmm. I think that's where vision and mission come in. But I think in the beginning, it was a lot more luck.
Got it. No, that's very valuable perspective. So what would you say have been some of the most difficult moments in building ThredUp, and what have been some of the proudest moments for you?
I mean, I think the most difficult, there have certainly been moments over the company's, history where we were pretty in doubt whether we would make it, right? And so there was a time back in 2017, 2018, where we were basically going to run out of money. And then we were able in the last minute to bring in, some incremental capital but it was very much in doubt. I remember when the investor said yeah, I'll do it, I have sign off, I started to cry. I had pent up so much, oh my God, I've worked on this thing at that point for 9 years and it's just going to go to zero. And you just hold all of that in as an entrepreneur. So that was a very hard moment because there was only a few people in the company who really understood the position that we were in. And so that part was really hard, later on. I think, the beginning of the pandemic, certainly created conditions where I wasn't sure we would make it. Right. That was a very, very tough time. So, I think the hardest times have generally been around capital because, you are committed to a vision and that vision requires money. And if you don't have enough of it, you can't realize the vision. And, at the end of the day, I think the founder and CEO's job is you got to set the vision, you got to hire the people, and you got to not run out of money. And if you get any three of those kind of wrong, it all ends up going to hell. So, and then the other one that I think was the hardest was we had 3 co-founders, myself, Chris, Oliver, Lubin. And I think I want to say 2016, 2017, maybe 2017, it was clear Oliver, who was a very good friend of mine, we went to college together, was just not scaling with the organization, the way that I had hoped. And so we had to basically, he basically left the company, and that was very hard. It was the right thing to do for the business over the long term, but it was very hard for him. And it was hard. I can't say it was hard for me, because that feels like unfair, because it wasn't really about me, but it was just like a hard dynamic to navigate, because he was such a trusted and close friend. And we're not really friends these days. We're friendly, but not friends. And that's always like a sad moment. So
yeah. And the proudest moments?
I think the proudest moments have been like, it's clear, like I can't pick any one moment per se, but I think like it's clear that like the impact that ThredUp is making at this point is just bigger than like we could ever have dreamed. Because I think when we started out, it was about building a great business and and doing good in the world. But it's now like people, like we're really changing, I think, the way shopping is happening, like, and the way brands think about the circular economy and sustainability. And government, officials call us, to like have us weigh in on things that like I never would have thought 10 years ago anybody would care about. So I just think like it's now clear like our impact is well beyond the fact that we sell used clothes on the internet. We're really like changing the conversation around sustainability and apparel. And so that's pretty exciting.
Yeah, very exciting. Absolutely. And then 2021, you took the company public. So what were the decision factors that led to, taking the company IPO, and what was that experience like?
So we originally thought we would go public in 20. So we began the process in the end of 2019. And then we had that pandemic thing. And so it kind of delayed stuff a little while. And then the decision to go public was, you really, what I've like come to learn, and I talk to other founders and entrepreneurs about this, is you sort of go public when you can. And I think there are examples of companies that like they over optimize the process, and then things change. And like a good example is like a company like Instacart, which just filed to go public last week. Like Instacart should have gone public like 4 years ago. And but because they over optimized the process, they didn't. And so our decision to go public was, one, it was a great time to raise capital. So markets were frothy, everybody was going public, and you kind of do it when you can. And so the process went well. We raised a ton of money. Like, people have to remember that when you go public, it's primarily a capital raising event, right? You're sort of raising money to do the next thing, and you're sort of churning over your shareholder base. And so it went great. It was a weird time to go public because it was still during COVID and lockdowns. And so everything was on Zoom, and so yeah, it was really great, and it's been rocky since then, right? I mean, I think at one point the company was worth like $3 billion, and then at one point last year it was worth 77 million. So the psychology of that, with the team and everything else, was kind of crazy. I mean, even today, like I woke up this morning and like some shareholder sold a bunch of, I don't know who this is, sold a bunch of stock, and the stock was down like 20%. Like, it hasn't been down 20% in months. So like, you just have to manage sort of the roller coaster of that. But net, it's been incredibly positive. I'm learning a ton because of it.
Yeah. How do you manage that roller coaster?
Red wine. No, I'm just kidding. I think it's taken some time to just, because I think when you first go public, you can't help but like feel like your self-worth is sort of tied up in like, how people are like perceiving you in the public market. And my CFO, in the beginning and he's been a public company CFO for a little while, he would say, I would say, Sean, why is the stock down today? And he would say, well, James, there were more sellers than buyers. And I would say, why is the stock up today? And he would say, well, James, there are more buyers than, right? And so his point was like, you're going to have to just get used to the fact that it goes up and it goes down. But like as a founder and a CEO, like our job is just run the business. And so I think I've gotten to the point where I still check all the time, but I don't let it like ruin my day or make my day great, right? It's part of like what I do. And so I think it's just maturity, but yeah.
Yeah. And James, I mean, it's been an incredible journey, you know, from that day when you take all your clothes to a consignment place, today, being a public, you know, highly successful company. How do you feel about your accomplishments today? Do you feel fulfilled? Do you feel content? Or do you feel, no, you just got a long way to go?
What I feel like immensely grateful for is that I still wake up every day and I'm really excited about what I get to do, right? Like, and I think the problems are still hard. Like it's amazing. I was talking to somebody yesterday and like, there's still so much to do, like on the opportunity, and like because the problem, like the world is dynamic, right? And like, you know, 3 or 4 years ago, like you never even had heard of Shein, right? Like this big giant fast fashion retailer. And look, it's a real pain right now. Like Shein is like making it really like is a real like staunch competitor. And so how do we react in a world? And so I would say in my mind, like the dynamics are always changing and that keeps it like exciting. And then the other piece is that we've now gotten to a point where like I have like the enormous like privilege to really do and work on what I want, right? And if I don't want to if I don't want to do something, I don't really have to do it. If I want to do something like this, I can do it, right? And so I feel quite privileged that I get to spend my days doing the things I want, and that I can say no to the things I don't want, right? Which wasn't always true.
Yeah.
And so and I'm able to do that in balance with my family and spending time with them, and which is great.
Yeah. And to that point, what brings you joy and happiness today?
Look, I actually like at the end of the day, like I want to feel like I put in a solid day's work and that I made some like contribution somehow, right? And so not all days are amazing, right? But like I love at the end of the day feeling like when I go home and I'm like, oh, what did I get done today? Wasn't that I like checked a bunch of things off my list, but like I did something that was like of value to someone, right? And so so that brings me a lot of joy. And then, you know, making sure that I'm like able to really have like deep personal relationships with my friends and family. And so if I can both feel like I'm making some impact each day somehow, and that I'm able to like, you know, be with my family and friends and like, you know, be present for them, like that's a pretty good life. And so so I try and keep it simple.
Yeah. Great. Thank you. So guys, we're going to start opening up for questions. Please go ahead and add your questions in chat and upvote the questions that you really want James to respond to. And I will ask a few last questions of James. So James, what is the most important piece of advice that you feel entrepreneurs and business professionals need to hear today? So today you're joined by many startup founders from all over the world. What piece of advice do you think they need to hear?
I think the most important thing that I've like started to even appreciate more is like work on the most important problems. And like, you know, like what I love about what you've done with One League, right, is like it's like this is an important thing, right? Like it's an important contribution that you're making. And I don't have any time anymore for entrepreneurs that are working on things that aren't like really important and making the world a better place. And so I encourage you, like anybody who's thinking about like work on something that like matters, because there's no shortage of problems in the world. And what we don't need is another dating app or another way to buy groceries on the internet, right? Or, you know, pick your thing. But there are real problems to be solved by great entrepreneurs. And so that's what I tell people.
Amazing, amazing advice. Thank you so much, James. All right, with that, we are going to open it up to Q&A. So for the first question, I would love to invite Mario from Chicago. Mario, if you could unmute yourself and also introduce yourself briefly and ask your question.
Hey, James, thanks for being here with us today. Yeah, my question was, I know you mentioned the story about going public. So I want to know what were your biggest internal hurdles that you faced as a company during that process? And then since that has occurred, you know, what of the culture has changed, and has the vision changed at all as well? And thanks again for being here.
Yeah, no, good question. I mean, I think internally, like the biggest challenge was there's a lot of like regulatory, honestly, like regulatory reporting work that's required to be a public company. And so like I can't even emphasize, like it's a lot of work, like just the process of going public. And ultimately, Mario, like it's made us such a better company. The discipline of like how we do the financials and the timeliness and how we can like really test and control everything. And so at that time, that was the hardest part, was like, man, like the SEC reporting, the technical accounting, like it's all like really quite challenging. But I think it's the right thing, because I think when the public is able to buy your shares, they have to believe that what they're buying has been like true and validated, right? So that piece was like a really important, and I think every company is not necessarily ready to do that. And as far as like what's changed, the thing that's changed the most that I don't like is that you just can't be quite as transparent in an organization as you used to be, because of like rules around insider trading and material non-public information. And so I always ran the business in like a fully transparent, like everybody got to see everything, right? Like we didn't really hide the performance, and you can't do that quite as much, anymore. And so it's created like weird situations where I'm like, I really wish everybody knew this, because then they could make better decisions. But if I tell them all this, then they're insiders, and then they have a whole different like responsibility. So that part's been kind of annoying. But generally, I think it's been good. Other than like the same thing I talked about earlier around the stock price, like it does weigh it does weigh people down, right, up or down, right? There was a time when everybody thought they were the smartest people in the room, and then there was a time when people thought they were the dumbest people in the room, and the answer is we're all somewhere in between.
Thank you, Mario. Thank you, James, for that question. Ardak, let's go to you next.
Hello, my name is Ardak. I'm from Kazakhstan. Thank you very much for this insightful session. And my question is, did you know from the beginning that you will be an entrepreneur? And I guess you knew. And what made you think so?
Yeah, I don't think, Ardak, that I ever was like, oh, I'm going to be an entrepreneur. But I think that I've always been somebody who like has wanted to like do something impactful that was hard. Right? And so I think somehow in my genetic code, it was like, hey, you should work on really hard things, and you should work on things that make a difference in the world. And so I think in this context, like it was being, starting schools, right? Or helping to start schools and making, and starting ThredUp. But I don't think honestly that I was ever like, oh, I'm going to go be an entrepreneur. And I'll tell you why, because when I first moved to California in 2001, like I moved to like Silicon Valley, right? And I lived like not far from Silicon Valley for like 6 years. Didn't think at all about being an entrepreneur, like in that way. And that didn't really like occur to me until after I went to business school. So to me, it was like the intersection of impact and leadership.
Awesome, thank you. Christina.
Hi there. My question is, if you had to pitch a new company today, knowing what you know now after going through the process, how would you do that differently? What would you do?
I mean, I don't know if exactly what I would do differently, Christina, but like a few things I've like learned that I would probably like pivot like a little bit, which is one, I don't think I appreciated how much when an investor says maybe, they really mean no. So I think I spent a lot of time, I wasted a lot of time trying to convince people to say yes, when what I should have done is just moved on to the next investor. And so like it's become clear to me, like if there's any hesitation, it's a no. And so that has helped a lot. Like, and I think I would have been so much more efficient in my fundraising process. I probably burned like 1,000 hours of my life trying to convince people to change their mind. That was one. The second is that like the most important thing that investors bet on are people. And so I think like understanding that like at the earliest stage, they're betting on the entrepreneur you, and they're betting on like the market size is really important. And so I would encourage you to think about like, why are you uniquely qualified or positioned to do the thing you're trying to do? And why is this market so big? And I think if you can answer those questions, like you can have some success.
Thank you.
Great.
Yeah.
Thank you, Christina. Thank you, James. On a slightly different note, Chun-Li, let's go to your question.
Thank you so much. I'm Chun-Li. I'm Chinese, actually. I'm living in New Zealand for many years, and I have some feeling about education. So my question is about education. You just mentioned about do something impactful. And I don't think the current education, maybe not every education, actually teach students, teach kids how to actually do something impactful. So my question is, do you think you educate your kids differently from other parents? And I guess yes, maybe yes, if yes. So what's the difference and why? Thank you.
I don't know. Certainly if like I am that different than probably you would be as a parent, but I think like what I've tried to lean on my children is that whatever you're gonna do like in life, like pursue it like with like tremendous passion. And like whatever it is, just be like committed to being really great at it. And it doesn't matter like whether you're gonna, and I like say this seriously because I think my youngest daughter would like to join the circus. Like, I'm like, if you join the circus, just join the circus and be great at it, right? And my oldest daughter, I think like wants to be like a pastry chef. I'm like, great, be committed to being a great pastry chef. Like, and so I think the way that I think about education for my children is like to really get them to find a passion and just commit themselves to being really good at it, whatever it is, and just not settling for being like mediocre. And so I always just kind of push them in that way, which, I think that ultimately, like if you're working on stuff that you're passionate about, like I think you can find success. I don't really care about like that they're really good at math and they're really good at history. Like I don't, you know what I mean? Like like on the margin, like I think they should not fail out of school, right? But like when my daughter like has a tough time on her math problem, I'm like, okay, well, just remember, like, you have to have a basic understanding of math, but I don't get all worked up about whether like she's going to be great at math, and I don't get worked up whether she's going to go to Harvard or not, right? But I do get worked up if she ends up in like a job that she hates every day. So,
thank you so much.
Thank you. No falls. I hope I'm saying your name right. Welcome to One League, and let's go ahead with your question.
Hello, hi, Emma. Thank you for taking on my question. I really want to thank One League for this opportunity. Our investors, eye to eye, are also mentors with One League as well. So primarily, starting off with an introduction, my name is Naufal. I'm the CEO and co-founder of SwagKicks. We are a platform for young Pakistanis to buy pre-loved sneakers and clothing.
Cool.
We are the largest in Pakistan or maybe South Asia right now. apart from being a platform for buying used products, we are also developing our technology to help scale one-of-one inventory models or circular fashion inventory models. So my question is pretty much regarding the operations itself. So how hard is it to scale? Like, what role did technology play in the operations at ThredUp? And also, I understand that there's a lot of consignment coming in. So in terms of sorting and grading and pricing those pieces, how was technology helpful?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's like two areas for investment on the technology side. One is just how efficiently you can like move items through like the process, right? So it's like at the end of the day, if you're selling used goods, like you need to be very efficient because they tend to have lower prices. And so for us, it's like the efficiency of how we do photography, how we do inspection, quality control, all those types of things. So there's like a technology investment of just like efficiency, right? And then there's like a technology investment of like where can you like really like cut out steps in the process, because you can only get so fast at doing certain things. Then you have to figure out like what are the shortcuts to getting it done faster. And so for us, there's a lot of work and innovation we're doing around using AI to like look at an item and like measure it like dynamically with a camera, right? There's work we're doing to think about how do we like use a camera to look at the fabric so that Umaima's sweater that she's wearing, like we'd be like, oh, we know that is a blend of this, this, and this. And so I think it's two pieces. It's efficiency and productivity on the technology side, and then it's like where can you like jump the process. Those are the two areas I would spend time on.
Great, fantastic. Perhaps the last question, Catalina, go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you for this amazing session today. Well, I'm the advisor for the Deputy Prime Minister for Digitalization in the Republic of Moldova. I don't know if you ever heard of this country. We are a small country. Oh, nice. And I'm trying to lobby and advocate for startups at the government level. And we have this problem and challenge to find the best way to support the ecosystem and the startups. I don't know if you ever have the experience in taking some support or assistance from the government institutions. If yes, that would really help me. Thank you.
We've never directly received like any government assistance, but I do think that there are certain, I'm like a big believer that there is a role for government in industries like this, because in areas where like there's a lot of waste, so think about it in like renewable energy, right? Electric cars, solar panels, recycling of electronics, like there's a bunch of things where like government actually can stimulate new business development in these areas. And so I think like if there's a role where government thinks, hey, it's not just about creating new businesses and new entrepreneurs, but ultimately about building like a more sustainable future, I think it's actually the intersection of those things where you can find opportunity for dollars, right? Where it isn't just like, hey, we're seed funding startups. Like to me, that doesn't seem like the role for government, but like funding a company that's going to improve recycling in Moldova, right? Or reduce landfilling in Moldova or something like that seems like there's an opportunity for government to come in there and do grants. And I'm actually pushing for that in the US, where there's, I think, a role for government to increase sort of the transaction costs for fast fashion companies. So it's like, hey, if you're producing fast fashion and then a lot of that fast fashion is ending up in a landfill, how do we hold fast fashion companies accountable for taking up all that landfill space? And so that's like where I think see the role of government here in the US, but hopefully that's helpful.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Catalina. Thank you so much, James, for this incredibly insightful and very, very inspiring conversation. It was certainly a highlight for me to have this conversation with you, to have you come and join us at One League. Thank you so much, everybody, for your participation. Thank you, mentors. Thank you, faculty. Thank you, One League Fellows. And thank you, new friends, for joining us today. James, thank you so much from the bottom of my heart.
Yeah,
really.
Thanks, Mama. Thanks for having me. Good luck, everyone. Hi, Esther. Good to see you.
Hi, James. Hey, everyone. Great to pop in.
Yeah, it's great stuff. Keep up the good work. I'm really inspired by all the stuff that you guys at One League are doing. So happy to help, happy to be part of it. And yeah, we'll do a part 2 next year.
We would absolutely do a part 2. We would so love to have you back. Thank you
Awesome.
so much for all your support, James. Have a wonderful
Yeah, you too. Thanks, guys. Bye.